homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm, or welcome back. In today's video, we are working upstairs in my small commercial kitchen making horseradish sauce for sale, but I thought I'd bring you along and show you how this works. Horseradish is super easy to grow. It is pretty much indestructible and very, very, very cold tolerant. And so once you have a patch of it, it tends to just keep going. And the horseradish in this particular recipe that I'm using is actually a piece that was planted by a gopher who moved a piece from my original plant halfway across the garden. So if you think that you're going to plant horseradish and it's going to deter gophers, that is definitely a myth. But this horseradish sauce is based on a recipe from Healthy Canning. And generally when you find horseradish sauce recipes in canning books, they are not usually heat processed because it will change the texture and the spiciness of the actual sauce. And so even the National Center for Home Food Preservation's recipe just has you mix this together and put it in the fridge. The cells of the horseradish root, when they react with oxygen, are very volatile, and that's what gives it the bite that you know. And the longer you allow it to be in contact with air before you add the vinegar, the spicier it's going to be. So as soon as you add the vinegar, that helps temper that. And it will lose potency over time in the fridge. So if you store it in the fridge and get it as spicy as you possibly can before you add the vinegar, in a couple of months, it's going to be super mild just because that stuff dissipates over time. And so they often suggest just keeping a horseradish root around and digging a piece of it and making a small batch of sauce when you want it if you like it really volatile, kind of similar to wasabi. This stuff is wildly volatile and potent when you first grind it. And so my recommendation is take your food processor or your blender or whatever it is that you're using to process this outside, and do this outside, preferably with some wind at your back. It will literally kind of napalm you out of the room. And when I do this in the video that I'm going to show you, I have a full VOC respirator on, and then eventually I have swim goggles on because I was thinking I didn't need to protect my eyes. And then by the time I got it finely ground, it was actually burning my eyes. Like, imagine cutting up an onion and that making your eyes sting times at least 10, if not 100. So be cautious when you're doing this because it is really, really volatile and somewhat painful. But if you love that kind of painful heat, then horseradish is a great recipe for you. This recipe is quite simple, basically about half as much vinegar as you have horseradish by volume. So if you have a cup of ground horseradish, add a half cup of vinegar, a little bit of salt, a little bit of lemon juice. The lemon juice is in there as a preservative to keep it from turning dark colored. And so that has a little bit of citric acid in it, and that's in there for. But horseradish, lovely this time of year, as we often do roasts and things like that. It goes great on beef or on seafood if you want to make your own cocktail sauce. So homemade horseradish, let's get started. So this bad boy is horseradish root, and we dug this from my garden. This piece was actually planted by a gopher, and so it came up in a weird spot, and we didn't really want it there. It's been there for a couple of years, and so we weren't worried about over digging it and having it just be completely gone, but the chances of that are very slim. And the first thing you want to do with this, after you rinse it off really well, is basically take it apart, because I've got a lot of little arms on here. And these little fine things I'm probably not going to bother with. I want the bigger chunky stuff. This is probably the ideal. Is something about this size. Probably going to be the most tender, easy to work with, basically like a carrot. But we get what we get, so we're going to use all of it. So I'm just breaking this up, and then I'm going to peel this with a combination of a knife and a potato peeler. This has an earthy scent to it, but it's not particularly pungent just yet. So this peels very similar to a carrot or a parsnip. And we're just going to get these cleaned up so that we can grind them in the food processor later. So I've got a lot more to process, but I wanted to show you guys this. This is about a pound of horseradish that has been peeled and cleaned, and I'm storing it in water because it will oxidize from the contact with the air. And so while I'm holding it in processing the rest of this horseradish, I'm just going to keep it submerged in water in order to keep it fresh. All right, you guys, the horseradish is peeled. That took a while. There sometimes are little pockets of dirt in there because of the way it grows and grows together. But this is ready to go. I'm making 36 ounces of horseradish, and so this is a couple of pounds of horseradish to start with, and then that's going to get ground. And the only other ingredients that go into this are vinegar, and this is just white vinegar that I've already got measured out, some salt, which I also have already measured out, and then a little bit of lemon juice just to give it a little bit more interest. And I'm going to suit up because there's a compound in the horseradish that is protected inside of the cells, and once you shred it, that compound is released and mixes with the air, and it is basically mustard gas. So it is going to be incredibly fumy, and it will, especially if the horseradish is really fresh, it will clear you out of the room. You literally can't stay. So I'm going to put on a full VOC respirator so that I can grind this and handle it without losing my mind or losing my lungs. So horseradish is really fibrous, and so I'm grinding this short end way in there so that I'm cutting through the fibers rather than along the fibers. And I'm going to initially shred this in my food processor, and then I will later take those shreds and put them in with my mixing knife and further grind them up. But initially, I find it's easier to shred than it is to use the blade. And coarsely shredded, this stuff isn't extremely volatile just yet. It's definitely getting there, but I don't have eye protection on right now, and I'm doing okay. I'm adding the salt, the lemon juice, and then as we go and it starts to get more ground, I'm adding the vinegar. But once this stuff starts to get really finely ground into a paste, it is very, very, very volatile because you've basically broken open all of those cell walls. And this is about the time where I realized that I have made some kind of a calculation error, and that the last time I made this recipe, I made it based on the volume of the horseradish that I had peeled as opposed to the amount that I needed for 6 batches. So I ended up having to take a bunch of this out, process it, and then add everything together in separate batches and recalculate the amount of vinegar and salt that I needed in order to make this come out the way it was supposed to. Thankfully, I had written down the amount of horseradish that I'd started with on this day, and so I was able to do all of those calculations. Always take good notes, guys. And it's about now that I realize that I have made a grave error by not putting eye protection on. And so when I go downstairs to do all the recalculations for this recipe, I also dig out my swim goggles and put those on. And it's December, and I have every window in this room open and all of the fans on. And here is what it's supposed to look like. It's supposed to look like a sauce, so much better texture. And because I'm making these for sale, I'm actually measuring these out by weight. Each one of these containers holds 6 ounces of this beautiful sauce, and these containers are tamper-proof, and so once they're closed, you can tell if they've been opened. They are also blessedly leak-proof, which means that once these are sealed, the volatility of this is no longer in the air. Fun fact, in the haze of horseradish fumes and the panic of having to redo all of the math on this recipe, I accidentally filmed this portion in slow-mo, and so this is sped up 400 times in order to make it watchable. All right, you guys, here is the 11 prepared horseradish that I have. And I had some problems with my notes. I haven't made this recipe in a couple of years, and so as I was doing it, I realized this isn't fitting in the food processor, something's not right, and I had way more horseradish than I needed, and so I ended up having to recalculate and figure out, based on what I actually started with, what I needed to do in terms of adding vinegar and salt and lemon juice, but we ended up with 11, and these are lovely, and they're pretty refrigerator stable. So these will hold in the refrigerator for a surprisingly long time because of the vinegar that's in it. And then I suspect that horseradish is probably also just anti-everything. I know it's used in fire cider simply because it is so potent. I forgot how completely mind-blowing that is to do that. I had to go get my swim goggles to put on because I was basically napalming myself and I couldn't see. Because even though the fumes weren't getting through my mask, I didn't have anything to protect my eyes. So that was quite the experience. I've got a little bit of extra here. And you can mix this with a little bit of heavy cream or creme fraiche or sour cream and make a creamy horseradish sauce. And this freezes beautifully. And so anything I don't sell in the next week or so, I'm just going to stash in the freezer and I'll sell it over the course of the winter. But this is definitely, if you're into horseradish, this is a recipe to try. It's very simple and has some good shelf stability in the refrigerator. So give this recipe a try, Tribe. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.